Well, hello and welcome to another edition of OESA Supplier Insights. I'm Mike Jackson. I have the pleasure of serving as Executive Director of Strategy and Research at OESA. And today I'm joined by Bart Huthwaite, Principal Operations and Supply Chain at RSM. Bart, great to have you here.
Mike, it's a pleasure to be with you today. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you. Listen, we're going to discuss our second quarter 2022 OESA Automotive Supplier Barometer that we do in partnership with RSM. And this obviously an incredibly timely release here on supply chain globalization and sustainability. So let's just jump right in. We've got a lot of content here. And so not a big surprise, but if we look at what happened relative to second quarter results, again, we're typically asking our members, how is your 12-month outlook for your business? And over the past 3 months, how has it changed? So how has your opinion changed? Has it become more optimistic or more pessimistic? And so not a big surprise, but we've seen a 12-point drop from 52 down to 40. And so, 50 being neutral, we're decidedly negative in that regard. And many of the key reasons I would say, the second quarter reflects the Russian invasion into Ukraine. And so some of the knock-on effects there. If we jump right into the next slide here, we'll talk a little bit about then what are some of the top threats. And not a big surprise, but we see more of the same. So production shutdowns due to supply chain shortages. Bart, are you surprised at all? It's kind of a remarkable thing, but the impact of supply chain constraints with regard to semiconductor, it continues. And that is just an incredibly persistent problem that's plaguing the industry right now.
Yeah, to your point, it's the knock-on effects. We're seeing a lot of the disruptions that we've seen for the past 2 years in terms of the labor availability, the logistical challenges. But when it comes to semiconductors, yeah, we don't anticipate that easing anytime soon, as we are hearing some of the developments and some of the advanced semiconductors are facing some challenges. And of course, to open a new foundry is going to take multiple years. So we see the right investments taking place, but we just don't see any short-term relief from this particular situation. Making sure that automotive has the semiconductors they need is obviously a big priority, but there's a lot of competition for the advanced semiconductors as well.
So you're absolutely right. And part of the challenge, certainly OESA, we've been pretty vocal in terms of our support for the CHIPS Act and the support there. $52 billion of investment, for that. And yet again, there's this, the balance between the analog chips, the older, designs that are so crucial relative to the new, it's an important factor as well. And so even with, funding, to your point, there's the challenge is this lead time, and that's quite a constraint there as well. A couple of other points here. You mentioned labor availability. That's number 2. Still, a tremendous, challenge there, headwind.
I think
a couple of additional. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Mike. I think the last time I saw there was approximately 1.58 jobs for everybody looking. So, we're still facing those significant labor challenges. If anybody's getting ready to travel for the holiday weekend, they certainly know the airline is facing similar situations. So, hopefully we start to see the labor situation improve, but it does not seem like that's imminent.
Yeah, and so that cascades to a couple other points. So external black swan event is another that actually got worse. So 5.2 on a 10-point scale down to 4.5. Now, clearly a result of the Russian invasion in Ukraine and knock on the continuing impact there to supply chains and the rest. But then also, how that's contributed to further weakness in the U.S. economy here in terms of the run-up fuel prices, inflationary effects. And so can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think this is lasting a lot longer than most people had hoped or perhaps anticipated. And so we are seeing those the huge issues with the food in terms of wheat driving up prices there, and of course the fuel, both from a natural gas and an oil standpoint. Obviously a much bigger impact for Europe, but it's having a huge global impact overall as well. And then in terms of the what's that rare earth? What's the material that's used in catalytic converters, Mike?
Palladium.
Yes, palladium. And
Absolutely.
then, of course, the palladium, the shortages that are, a lot of the world's palladium comes from that region. So that's a challenge in terms of catalytic converters as we move more and more towards ESG and emissions and what have you. That's going to be a bit of a challenge along with the other rare earth minerals. So those are some of the impacts that we're seeing exacerbating what has already been a very difficult situation.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Let's continue on here a little bit. I want to show you this one here because this chart is pretty impactful. We ask our members, hey, so we're looking at the impact here, the scope of impact relative to the duration of impact. And so if you look at the top right quadrant, not a big surprise, high impact and long effect, semiconductor, as well as port and border delays and logistics issues. And the concern here is that, you're not far behind, you've got steel and aluminum shortages. And so there are a number of different factors. And I think what's important here is that it basically, the question, the way it's asked, what's the likelihood that issues will be resolved within the next 3 months? And so the reality is that there isn't an expectation to this front. So some thoughts there, some color?
Yeah, I think these two areas, it's clear that we've underinvested in these areas as a country. Our ports need a lot of work, and from a global standpoint, we're just way behind from an automation standpoint. Obviously, we're going through the longshoreman contract negotiations right now, which is making things a bit more difficult. There's a huge desire to invest more technology, but there's concern from the union, of course, that that's going to take jobs. So I think we're going to see a lot more focus on the ports and the infrastructure associated with the ports over the next several years. But again, it's like semiconductors. You can't build a foundry overnight, and so it's going to take a long time for us to see any material improvement on in terms of our ports in the US, but either on the East or the West Coast. China is obviously got better at producing during lockdowns through having folks stay at through setting up bubbles, essentially, with having folks stay at dormitories or actually in the plants. But it got to having to transport the goods and materials across the country, and then the ports is really where things started to get clogged up again. So we anticipate to see continued disruption in the logistics for the foreseeable future.
You make a great point, and just a reminder that, of course, the lockdowns in China, incredibly broad in scope, and so creating a tremendous impact here in the second quarter, and so as we saw the impacts there, I mean, it was pretty profound, and so as a result, clearly a significant issue as well, in addition to the Russian invasion in Ukraine. So let's continue on here, and just want to highlight, this is an important one, I think. If we look at what are your biggest opportunities? Of course, there are a whole host of headwinds, but I like a number of these different components because what it does is it says, listen, we know that there are challenges. I mean, I have to say, God bless the supply base and the industry as a whole, from the standpoint that all of the resilience that has been shown here over these past couple of years has been incredible, through COVID, through semiconductor shortages, and then the knock-on, the supply chain disruptions that followed. And so the interesting piece here is, so what are your biggest opportunities? Number one, business conquest and consolidation. So growth opportunities for those organizations that are kind of on the leading edge of efficiency, and so that, I think, is pretty compelling. Volume growth, if you want to speak to that a little bit, obviously from year ago to present, and looking at a couple of, cost recovery, a really important one. Obviously, a number of suppliers, some have been, kind of proactive or a little bit earlier in terms of asking for some of that, and kind of the proof to hey, look here, this is where we're at. And then also looking at the BEV segment. So I'll let you kind of take
Well,
over.
I think the first one there, Mike, is interesting. It's the business conquest and consolidation. I think we will, as the headwinds continue to increase from an economic standpoint, begin to see winners and losers. We're in a tremendous transition period moving towards electric, and so we're going to see some folks making the right investments and others not making the right investments. And so I think that's going to be very interesting. And then would you mind putting that chart back up, please?
Sure.
Thank you. And then the cost recovery, of course, we're really trying to claw back a lot of the cost. We've been working with a lot of our clients to look for those opportunities to improve their margin. And the pricing is a big one as well. To what extent are we going to be able to pass on pricing increases to our customers? We haven't seen a ton of that, but the cost pressures are increasing and the margin pressures are real.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one too. If we just for North America, right? Last couple of years we've been, sub 13 million units on a production basis here for North America. So incredibly constrained volume. And so this year, even though we've seen some downside, a little bit of trimming, some revised forecasts here since, but since the start of the year, what we have seen is that we're still in the kind of mid to upper 14 million unit range here. And so we're still talking about, 1.5 to 1.7 million units of additional volume from a year ago. Now that's, certainly a bright spot, provided that supplies of semiconductors, are maintained or that they can be, made available. But at the same time, with labor, that where it is, that is another pain point, right?
Absolutely, Mike. I'm smiling because I placed my order for my new vehicle back in February and it has yet to be scheduled. I understand that it is a chip issue. So the good news is we do have a pretty healthy pipeline. So I think it's long as we can work through the supply constraints, the demand is there. It hasn't dissipated. The household incomes or balance sheets are still relatively healthy, although they will come under more and more pressure as the economy starts to turn.
Well, with that, certainly look forward to exploring capital markets and innovation here this next time around. But thank you, Bart, for your expertise today.
Greatly appreciate the opportunity, Mike. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for watching and look for us next time here with OESA Supplier Insights. Thank you and take care.